Story 1. It was 10:30 at night. I was riding shotgun in Armand's car, and 3 other friends, 2 guys and 1 girl, were seated behind. We had gone to a resort in the outskirts of town to have dinner and were returning home by the highway. It was a dark, deserted road with no streetlights. Inside the car, the 3 friends in the back seat were constantly joking about how creepy the road was and how all of them had heard stories of some ghostly children who kept crossing the streets running barefoot. I was enthralled by their tales but didn't quite believe them, for they were too over the top to be true. Armand, though, was quaking in his seat, begging them to stop. I laughed and patted him on the back, ensuring him that they were only joking and there were no such things as ghosts or evil spirits. Just then, as if to prove me wrong, 3 middle-aged men suddenly appeared, walking by the side of the road. For the split second that I saw them, their features were imprinted in my mind. The one on the left was dressed in a maroon cardigan, the one in the center had a yellow turban on his head, and the one on the right had a black shawl wrapped around his shoulders. Their appearance was so sudden that Armand swerved the car violently to avoid hitting them, causing us all to jump in our seats. We crossed them, but shock was tangible inside the car. The laughter of seconds ago reduced to stunned silence. It was too dark to make out where these 3 men came from, but if you were me, you would have sworn they appeared out of thin air. I was in the front seat, constantly keeping an eye out on the road. I would have seen beforehand if 3 men in such distinct clothes were walking right by us. There was no banter now, no more ghost stories. We were too petrified to even make conversation. The girl in the back urged Armand to drive faster so we could reach home. My own heart was thumping hard, but I put on a brave visage and turned back to tell them that everything was all right, that those men were probably locals from the nearby village out on a post-dinner walk. Just then, our car swerved violently again, skidding dangerously close to the divider. I turned around, my hand on Armand's shoulder to steady myself, and asked, "What the hell was that?" Armand's fists were gripping the steering wheel tight. His voice came out in barely a whimper. There were 3 men walking by. Those same 3 men we crossed 5 minutes back. I looked at him, my mouth agape in disbelief. No, that can't be, I reasoned. Was the man in the center wearing yellow headgear? Yes, and the one on the left a maroon jacket. They were the same men, I swear. An irrational fear tightened itself around my heart in a vice-like grip. Finding my voice, I looked at the navigation app on my phone and said, "We have around 1 kilometer of this road ahead of us. Let us all keep our eyes open till we reach." The highway was filled with potholes, but a terrified Armand drove as fast as he could and crossed the distance within 10 minutes. On the last stretch of the highway, just before the familiar lights of the town came into view, we could spot a single headlight in the distance. I grabbed Armand's wrist in caution, as everyone else held their breath, not knowing what to expect. And as we drove closer, we could see a broken-down motorbike by the road. 3 men stood next to it, waving at us, asking us to stop our car and get help. These men were much younger, probably in their 20s, but the one who flagged us down was wearing a maroon cardigan, and the one standing closest to the motorbike had a black shawl thrown carelessly around his shoulders. We didn't stop. None of us uttered a word. Armand stepped on the accelerator and sped past in a whiz. I looked back, terrified that these men might follow us on their bike, but all I saw was the darkness. The headlight that had been flashing just a few seconds ago had disappeared. Where had it gone? Neither Armand, nor I, nor the 3 friends in the back seat breathed until we reached the familiar entrance to the city. It was then that all of us let out a sigh of relief. What was it that had just happened? Who were those 3 men and what were they trying to tell us? What would have happened had we stopped our car at their behest? I still get goosebumps when I think of that fateful night. Them, and the chills that run down my spine every time the image of those 3 men flashes in my mind, are the only evidence remaining now. Evidence that whatever happened that night was real, and not a figment of my imagination story. About 4 years ago, I was driving home on the interstate from a concert in another city. It was probably 11:30 or 12 at night, and I was about halfway home. It had been several miles since the last exit, and would be several more until the next. On the shoulder, in the beam of my headlights, I saw a man dressed in a suit jacket down on all fours, patting the ground and looking around in a small circle. My initial impression was that he was in a similar position to Velma from Scooby-Doo when she's looking for her glasses. That was all he was doing, just there on his hands and knees, kind of patting the ground. What struck me as extremely odd is that there were no cars parked on the shoulder anywhere nearby, nothing to indicate he had come out of a vehicle. Having traveled this stretch of road many times during the day, I know that the only thing on the other side of the guardrail was empty fields. I mean, even though this was a major interstate, we were quite literally in the middle of nowhere. The nearest city wasn't for 20 miles. I can't imagine how he got out there, dressed in a suit, so late at night, and so far from much of anything. I didn't stop to check on him because I wasn't about to end up involved in something strange, but it's stuck out in my memory ever since. I'm sure there's probably an innocent explanation, but it sure as fuck weirded me out. Story 3. A few years ago, I was driving home at night on HWY in Oregon between Monmouth and Corvallis. It was very dark, with clouds obscuring all moonlight. I had just reached a part of the road that traverses between two hills with virtually no shoulder, when there were suddenly headlights in my rearview mirror. I hadn't seen the car approaching, but there it was, tailgating very close to me with high beams on. I reached up to adjust the mirror, but at that moment they turned the lights off. A few cars were approaching from the other direction, and as the first two passed, their headlights illuminated the car tailgating me, and I could see it clearly in my rearview mirror. A sleek, black, older model sports car, like something you would have seen in a movie about cool teenagers in the 70s. I was alarmed that this guy was tailgating so closely on a dark night with no headlights, and was wondering what to do when a third car approached in the opposite direction. As they approached, their headlights illuminated the road behind me and the black car was gone, vanished. As it was so late, I continued on to my home, but the next day drove back out there to see if there was a road or driveway the car could have taken. As I had suspected, there wasn't any place that car could have gone. The road is bordered on both sides by a steep raised grade, sort of like a hill on each side, no shoulder, no driveways, and no other turnouts. I got home and posted about the experience on my Facebook page. I had several people respond that the exact thing that happened to them at that same place. In each instance, it was on a very dark night with no moonlight or any other illumination except for the headlights of passing cars. Story. Once upon a moonless night, with a heavy fog draped over the land like a shroud, a solitary traveler named Emily embarked on a journey down a desolate highway. The only companion she had was the low hum of her car's engine and the occasional flicker of the dashboard lights. Emily had heard tales of this stretch of road, stories whispered in hushed tones about its eerie reputation, but she dismissed them as mere superstition, confident in her ability to navigate any road, no matter how foreboding. Little did she know that this journey would test her courage in ways she could never have imagined. As she drove deeper into the night, the fog thickened, enveloping her car in an impenetrable veil. Emily's heart raced as she strained to see through the mist, her knuckles turning white as she gripped the steering wheel. Suddenly, she spotted something in the distance, a figure standing in the middle of the road. Panic surged through Emily as she slammed on the brakes, the tires screeching against the asphalt. But as the car came to a halt, the figure vanished into thin air, leaving behind only a chilling sense of dread. Shaken but determined to press on, Emily continued her journey, each passing mile feeling like an eternity. But the road seemed to stretch on endlessly, twisting and turning through the darkness like a malevolent serpent. Then, without warning, the fog parted, revealing a scene straight out of a nightmare. Before her stood a ghostly town, its dilapidated buildings looming ominously in the night. Emily's heart sank as she realized she had stumbled upon the infamous ghost town that haunted the highway. Desperate to escape, Emily spun the wheel and accelerated away from the town, the headlights piercing the darkness like a beacon of hope. But no matter how fast she drove, the town seemed to recede into the distance, taunting her with its spectral presence. Just when Emily thought she couldn't take another moment of the nightmare, she saw a glimmer of light ahead. It was a gas station, a solitary oasis amidst the desolate. With a surge of relief, she pulled into the station, praying for sanctuary from the horrors of the highway. But as she stepped out of the car, Emily froze in terror. The gas station was deserted, the pumps rusted and decrepit, and as she turned to flee, she saw them, the ghostly figures of the town's former inhabitants, their eyes hollow and empty as they surrounded her in an otherworldly embrace. With a scream that echoed through the night, Emily realized too late that some roads are best left untraveled, for they lead not to salvation, but to the darkest depths of the unknown. And as the fog closed in around her, she knew that she would never escape the highway's icy grip.